Welcome back to Chris and Collin in the Morning. This is our second podcast where we like to talk about real issues that matter. And so Collin and I both had the opportunity to talk to some people in our lives that hold marginalized identities, and while we cannot possibly do justice in speaking for them, we're going to try and articulate some of the takeaways we got about how to advocate for minority, individuals and cultures in a white dominant society.
Yeah, so I interviewed a black man named Trey. He is someone I know personally, but didn't know like that much. I was very interested not only in learning his experience, but to get to know him more. Like not just for the assignment, but just like personally. Mm-hmm. And then do you want to say who?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Kelly Mark. She is actually, we've known each other since we were 11 years old, and she's a Chinese-American Christian woman. And so I was able to listen to her and speak to her about her experiences, about her identity as well, and I think along the lines of what Collin learned, like I was kind of surprised about some of the things that were shared with me.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the first thing we talked about set the tone for the whole interview that like, okay, yeah, this person definitely has a different experience than me, and from then on, I like went completely off script. Actually, I had like questions and like kind of things like maybe ways to take it. I wasn't sure exactly how to like bring up the conversations of like his worldview and like stuff. But from that moment on, when basically from the first question, I like got rid of the questions and we just had a conversation.
I did the same thing.
Because I felt like the questions didn't do anything justice. We were talking about just something way more important to him, which started off what it was about his experience with like always having to think about police and how to behave with police, having to always think about being in certain neighborhoods, like what color is he wearing, like is this a good neighborhood or not in terms of gang, is it high or low in gang affiliation. And right away I was just like, I've never had to think about that, and I've heard people having to think about that, but to hear that he still does that, like every neighborhood like if it's a new neighborhood here in Seattle that he goes to, he's like thinking of, is this a good neighborhood, is this like or sorry, I keep saying good, I mean like high gang violence, and like is there
safe or whatever,
is there like a certain color that I can't wear, and
that's like a hyper awareness that we do not have to worry about.
Yeah, I've never thought about that. And that was really impactful for me to hear already. Like that is just another level of stress that it sounds like he's thought about his whole life that I've never had to think about like a day of my life. Like that was just wild to hear.
What was interesting for me is Kelly went through like certain events growing up. And there's one in particular that I'm going to share because it involves me, and it was like a learning opportunity for me too. But I guess Kelly and I used to eat lunch together every day in high school with a big group of friends, and she shared with me that one day she went to make friends with some Asian students because she didn't feel like she had that community. Mm-hmm. And I made some offhanded comment about, what, are you just going to go sit with your Asian friends now? One, I was like super embarrassed when she told me this, that I had said that.
She still remembered it?
She still remembered it, and I'm like super glad that she like told me about that, and I had the opportunity to repair with her in the moment. But I probably just said like an offhanded comment at what it really was. I mean, we talked about it. It was like, I didn't want to be abandoned. She didn't want to miss out, right? So it's some like interpersonal dynamics at play, but like that one comment stuck with her. Mm-hmm. And so that made me think, like, how many comments has she received, some microaggressions has she received over the years that like have really stuck with her, whether it's microaggressions based on her ethnicity or the fact that she's a woman. You know, she spoke a lot about sexism in the workplace that she's experienced as a therapist too. So like, it was interesting to go back through some of these pivotal like childhood moments and that we shared together, and for her to give me like a totally different perspective on those things. It was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. I will say during the interview, like especially right after, I realized like, oh yeah, no, this is different, and I don't know maybe enough about like other people's experiences I should. I felt white. Like I felt very aware of
like super white.
Yeah, I just felt very aware of my like different experience, and I was trying so hard to like just hear him and try to understand, but there was times that even I was like reflecting or like asking questions back or something, and he would say like no, not like that. You know, there definitely was just like things that I don't have the easiest time understanding, I think, right away.
Right.
And so just to your point about like that new perspective, I feel like I was feeling that during the interview. Yeah, it just puts me in perspective that there is like different perspectives for sure. And
you know, I think it's one thing to like learn about this stuff in school on like a very like academic level, but to have like that intimate conversation with someone, what struck me as really interesting is Kelly shared with me that a lot of her, you know, attachment and to Chinese culture was through church, because where we grew up was very like, we grew up in the east side in Bellevue. It's very white over there.
Yeah.
And so that's how she connected to Chinese culture, is through church. So not only was it a spiritual place for her, but a cultural place as well. And she asked me to come along a few times. I've gone to church with her a few times. And although it wasn't her intention at the time, she was like, you know, I think looking back, like, that was my way of showing you a side of me that a lot of our other friends didn't get to see. Which I thought was like really special, whether it was her, you know, intention or not. But I mean, that's really what it was, is like there's this part of her, I think she told me that like a lot of people don't get to see, and she was really excited to have this conversation, about like wanting to have this like more intimate connection as human beings, which I felt very grateful for.
Yeah, as I felt a little awkward and very white, like trying to understand Trey's experience. At the end of it, he said he got a lot out of it. I was like probably more overjoyed to hear that than maybe I should be, or is comfortable or something. But yeah, I don't know, because I always feel a little weird, like asking people to of other identity groups, like, can I interview you or like examine you or something like that, like, and I always wonder if that feels weird for them.
I think you bring up a good, interesting point. I mean, I'm gay, and so there's been times when the primary focus on me is based on that aspect of my identity, and I'm torn. Like sometimes I'm happy to educate others, and other times I'm like, that's not my responsibility.
Right.
I don't want to be tokenized, and I think
exactly.
Like that, I had that feeling too, like, make sure I'm not tokenizing this experience, make sure that like my white shame or whatever it is does not prevent me from like absorbing what she's giving me. Yeah, I tried hard to do that too. Well, not hard, but I mean, more mindful.
I was mindful of that,
yeah.
And I wanted it to be more conversational. I wanted it to just be more natural. So
I know I had like all these like questions on my phone, and like we started with the first one, and that was it.
Yep. Same. No, just went off script.
I wanted to read this quote because I thought this was so interesting. I feel like this ties into kind of what both of us are talking about, because both of it sounds like our experiences were very personal with these individuals. And so this is from a neuroscience research study conducted by Susan Fisk, a psychologist at Princeton University, who is a leading expert on prejudice, and she found that dehumanizing others activates the brain's disgust regions and deactivates the empathy regions. And that really kind of struck me, that the brain could even have like a disgust region. I'm not sure like what exactly like parts of the brain are involved in that, but I think I was gravitated towards that because a good portion of our conversation was about like media representation for Asian men and women. And that was sort of, when I asked Kelly, it was sort of her primary focus was like, there needs to be better media representation that is not, you know, beholden to a white narrative kind of thing. And sorry, pause. The screen went out. And so because of that, like, she, you know, pointed out that, like, Asian women are typically overly sexualized in the media, that Asian men compared to men of other races are, like, emasculated. They're, like, the beta or sigma males. Which, when she said that, I was kind of like, oh, you're right. You know, like, they're on the bottom of the totem pole. And, like, you know, the fact that, like, this is the first year that, in history, that an Asian woman is nominated for lead actress at the Oscars, I think that's pretty telling.
Yeah, the representation part was something that Trey talked about too when I asked him, is there a specific like advocacy piece or thing that would be helpful that he wants to see? He talked about having more black representation of like just more visible signs or displays of black people being in like the workforce or like different types of workforces, rather than, I guess, like maybe the narrow path that is always shown, like as athletes or rappers,
or criminals,
And he said that would have helped him a lot growing up as a kid, and specifically this part that moved me a lot, seeing them displayed like that where they could still be themselves. So he talked about, as he kind of like grew older and got into jobs, he felt like he had to act a certain way to not make white people uncomfortable. He felt like he had to get rid of his cornrows and his dreads, you know, and that part was really sad to me. Just that's like the reality that people feel like that, and that's what the system makes people feel like. Because that just sounds to me like suppression.
Completely.
And like our systems, like suppressing people to fit, like, I don't know, just some weird restricted ideal. And so he talked about, like representation, not only of like black people being in those spaces, but being themselves and not having to be like whitewashed, you know?
Yeah. Whitewash feels like the totally appropriate word. But what you're saying just reminds me of like but like the culture we belong to, you know, white dominant culture, like expects others because of some, I don't know, uncomfortability that's tied to the privilege that's had, that says like you need to conform so like I feel comfortable, versus like we're gonna embrace and, you know, represent, you know, and just totally be wrapped in that diversity. You know, in 2021 when there was like the increase in media coverage for attacks on Asians, I don't think there was more attacks. I think there was more media coverage, right? Because like brutality happens, and like what's the hot button issue of the moment, right? And Kelly was sharing with me that Asian men were quite silent during that time, that it was the women who were using their voices, and it kind of sounded like it played into the stereotypes of like how do they fit into white culture, and how did they not basically rock the boat, right, to continue to survive, because, you know, immigrants, anybody that comes to this country, she reminded me that like it's about survival first, and like that's paramount, and you'll do what you need to do to survive. And so the ability to thrive and to like even participate in voting or anything like that is completely secondary.
That's so interesting. Trey and I had the same conversation about that. I asked him a bit about how he felt. One, he did express kind of discomfort with like the media portrayal of like black issues, just like of how much it is in the media, and like how honestly in a weird like judgment space. Like he talked about how like even he feels sometimes pressure of like I have to post something or I have to like advocate for something, otherwise I'm not like doing my job enough. And shoot, what was the thing?
Like be performative for other people, like other black people or other white people, or just in general.
Just like the social justice kind of push on social media in particular that is so active. Strong. Yeah, and also that he's just seeing the imagery of like black people, you know, getting harmed by police or the system and stuff. He just didn't want to see it as much, or at least he kind of says he kind of likes to exit himself from that space a little bit because it's just, and he said it like in the very similar way where his place where he's at right now is still about survival. So when he thinks about like protesting or like getting really involved in that, it's still, it feels like a risk for him. Like, you know, he's still thinking about like, are the police going to do something to me? Or, you know, am I going to be at the wrong situation at the wrong time and like have some major consequences from that? And again, what came to my mind was like white people protesting, they don't have to think about that as much.
We get way less to lose.
Exactly. They get to go back home, you know, to their comfortable environment, where Trey seems like he gets to go back home and still think about like how he shows up in spaces and like, you know, it was such a life or death pressure that I felt like he feels when he thinks about some of this stuff, and that he said that his father in particular really felt and kind of cautioned him with that. Yeah, it's just so much more to carry than I feel like other people, you know.
I mean, that's just impactful hearing you say that. You know, I mean, what it's making me think of, both of what you've shared about Trey and what Kelly shared with me, is like the advocacy really starts on like a personal level. You know, when those attacks were happening, she told me that like she felt more safe when people she cared about simply acknowledged it, like what was going on, and reached out to her. And you know, I thought about my experiences as being gay, and like when there's been like, you know, like the Pulse nightclub shooting or like these horrific attacks on my community, I do feel more seen when people just simply acknowledge that. You know, being seen is an important thing, and kind of I feel like the first piece to advocacy. You know, and you know, I also thought about the fact that, you know, we're talking about two people that have their identities, like they can't mask, right? Like they're out in the world, and I have the you know, the privilege of being able to mask my identity. So that's an interesting parallel for me, like listening to like, in what ways have I been able to like pass if I needed to create safety, right? Versus like, in which ways have I not been able to hide? You know, and it's different. It's just making me think about that. Yeah.
Well, this even applies to you, for, you know, after hearing that. But what I also like about both of our conversations with Trey and Kelly is that personal approach that you talked about. When talking about advocacy, it just seemed more organic, or even like, I don't know, there was a, to hear, just to ask the question, what do you want to see different, or like what would make the impact for you, rather than, I guess, like thinking about it as a global thing, and like really thinking like what I want to see different for all these people. Like there was something more organic about asking Trey, like, what would you want to see different? And his answer was one about the black representation in like the workspaces, but also just like for the city of Seattle to have more like displays or places where you can go to see where events are happening, or like spaces, black spaces are. Again, a very like personable, I think, advocacy work that I could see for him would make such an impact for his like level of comfortability being in Seattle.
That makes sense.
And having that sense of connection and culture, and something that also sounds very doable. Like that sounds like,
right,
like that's such a simple fix. that could really help a lot of people. That I don't know, that I see as like a important advocacy possibility is just like that little change of like let's promote more Black spaces that people can go to.
Yeah. Promote more Asian spaces, and it's interesting because this is not to like take away at all from the bigger movements that are going on to like stop Asian violence, Black Lives Matter, anything like that, because those are very obviously important, and they've shed a lot of light to issues that have simply been ignored. But like, it can feel pretty daunting, and like, I don't think anybody wants to be a white savior, right?
There's just something so powerful about asking the person and like hearing what they want, and and what would make a big difference in their life. And
because I know I can take that message to heart from that personal conversation and do something more personal to like affect change on a smaller level. If nothing else, in like showing up and listening and help promoting for more representation. Like, I have a online magazine, and like a big thing that I've done over the years with it is, and people always give me flack for this, like, well, why don't you just write the articles yourself about and interview people? I'm like, I prefer them to write in their own voices. I'm not a woman that was impacted by Me Too. I was impacted by Me Too, but not a woman. I wanted a woman's perspective, for example, like that. And I find when people get the opportunity and the platform to share their stories in their own voices, it's way more impactful.
Well, it just makes me wonder if more people, and myself included, heard, like, really asked those questions, listened to the individual, and did some of those maybe like smaller level advocacies. If we just had like more of that, just smaller level advocacy, like just all of those coming up, I wonder if that would like bring the bigger change.
It's like the butterfly effect, right?
Yeah.
Like, we all make these small changes and it has a net positive effect.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's the point of this whole thing.
Yeah, it just makes me think of advocacy, because I'm always thinking about advocacy, but it feels so daunting sometimes. It feels so like how, like, to make those bigger changes, it seems so difficult to do in the time that they really need to be done. I mean, it needs to be done now, but
it's so interesting that both of our people that we interviewed, they weren't talking about like a specific law or policy or anything like that. They simply were saying that they wanted to see more of themselves represented in media, in the world, in the narrative.
That kind of makes me think of what you just said about really being seen, being more of the desired thing than to be like I don't know, saved or fought for or something like that. Just more to be understood and heard. And it sounds like both of our people, they really just want more representation. They want more like just for them to be visible and for them to be like to belong. More than like some huge like devote your life to to like bring down this huge thing, which again I want done, but it makes me think that maybe really hearing the people and attacking these smaller level things to make people feel better and more comfortable and like they belong in these spaces, if we did so like a lot of that, if that would make that more of a huge impact.
I believe so. The big takeaway I got was that the person I interviewed, she holds multiple minority identities, and shared with me that basically she didn't feel like she belonged to the white culture or the Chinese culture, like for different different reasons. And like that just reminded me of like, for myself, like, am I being gay enough to be part of the gay community? Right? And what she said really struck a chord with me, was that that's a really lonely place to be, to not feel like you belong. Because when you don't feel like you belong, you don't even feel like somebody's going to care enough to try and make you feel seen. Right? So I think these simple conversations that we have, like, this is how we do it. Like, I don't know about you, but like, I feel very connected to Kelly, and was so honored that she shared these things with me.
yeah, I definitely felt connected to Trey. I felt like I should have more of these conversations.
Same.
That's how that was like my takeaway is there's definitely more for me to learn, and this is to see the impact on someone and to see the different experience. It definitely made me aware more of my ignorance and just that I want to continue to learn and to show up as imperfect and like expose myself to those environments because I got a lot out of it.
There's something so beautiful about humbling yourself and realizing that like you don't know everything. Like I know I was like I said, back to what she shared with me, like a seemingly benign comment that I made when we were teenagers. Like I was like, wow, like words matter. It's like our most powerful tool. The stories we tell about ourselves, the stories we tell about others, the stories others tell about themselves, like those are the most powerful things that are going to affect change. No policy or law or anything I really feel like will capture the human aspect, and when we attach labels and we strip the humanity out of advocacy, like I think it kind of goes along like that, like the empathy part of the brain's not activated, so why are you going to care as much?
Yeah.
It's like that personal touch. And so, I mean, I'm looking forward to having more of these conversations with people.
Yeah, at the end of it, Trey, after even, I got what I needed for the assignment, but we both said like, man, I said, I have more stuff I want to know. Like I have still more questions. He said that he really enjoyed the conversation and that he'd be definitely open to talking more. So, I want to do that as well.
I think we both really want to thank Kelly and Trey, if you're watching this, for sharing those experiences with us, and hopefully we didn't misquote you guys. I don't think we did, but maybe we can have you guys on in a future podcast to share these things directly with our audience. Before we go, do you have anything you want to add?
I think I'm good.
Well, as always, thanks for watching, and we promise we'll have part 3 up sooner than a year later. So,